So here we are, and my friend has taken a lot of video from me. This is more serious, and I've been an independent person my whole life, and I've built things my whole life, and I've helped people my whole life. I've been a stonemason, a carpenter, and built stone walls and took down buildings. I created recycle programs in California, and I've always just moved forward. Well, after I bought this house, I realized that I was supposed to buy the house, and I thought that the idea was to save the house. This house is a historical house, 1778, and then part of it that we're in right now was 1889. It was a beautiful house. It was what I always wanted. I built a castle in California, and by that you're probably wondering what I'm talking about. Along the way, when I was a young man, we bought a little house. My wife and I did. Before we bought that house, before we bought that house, before we got married, we took down a large house in Monterey, and I came to the East Coast. Right now I'm talking to you from New Hampshire. And basically, we decided we'd build a house. If we couldn't find one in Monterey, the houses were super expensive. Just to give you an idea, I think our house now is worth about $2 million that we lost in 2014. But I've been following this journey, and I realized something later on. It took me 33 years to build the castle out there. I had the longest permit probably in Monterey history. But other things happened, and some of them bad. And one of them was that I had to leave Monterey because of some terrorist activity and some other stuff, and some evil government stuff. And so I built the castle, and then we were forced out of it. When we were forced out of it, we were brought here. And I have to tell you, and I don't care whether people write little notations as this guy's off is not quite with it. I work with the spiritual energy, and I've now found societies that also do the same. And the spiritual energy has saved my life several times. And it saved something I did in the house out there, saved my daughters and my wife. So basically, I don't discount it. But when I was a boy, it saved my life 3 times. I was a teenager. And I made a promise to this spiritual world that I would do what they wanted me to do. I did not read the fine print, and I should have. But a turtle saved me. That sounds weird, but I looked over the bridge, and there was a turtle, so it delayed me. I walked around the corner. A car almost ran over me. I could feel it. And the first time I was plugging in a sandblaster, because I do lost wax casting, and I was working on a nativity scene, which was cool in itself. Had a golden child in it, and I plugged it in, and flap, explosion, big giant blue explosion right in front of my face. I had plugged in a dead motor to a 220 volt thing that I pulled down off the ceiling. Not a scratch on me, didn't blind me, nothing. About a year later, when they were doing an aluminum casting, it blew up and burned a bunch of the people. My shop teacher's coat had little black holes in it, and there were burn marks on his face. Fortunately, he was wearing a face mask, so that could have been me standing at that too as well. And then the second time that I was saved was I was sitting on the wall at Carmel High, and I was waiting for the bus, and there was a guy using a reel mower, and so I'm sitting there reading my homework, waiting for the bus, and ching, right near my eye, I could feel this thing. It shot like a little stone, like the size of a .22, gun, and it hit the adobe wall and took a chip out of it. That could have easily put out my eye or killed me, gone in my head. It didn't. So, like I said, the third time was I had crossed the bridge, and I looked over and I saw a turtle. I had been on the Carmel River for probably, since I was 12, and I'd never seen a turtle. And turtles are highly significant in the Indian Native American spirit world. And I looked over the bridge, and there's this nice-sized river turtle down there. I almost went down to get it, but I was in my good clothes and I was 20 feet up. Probably about 8 years before that, or 6 years before that, my family and I crossed that bridge when it was all twisted, and these people were watching us, and the poles were going, and the big flood, in '68. So I remember that bridge, and they put the new one in. So then that delayed me, and so as I crossed Holt Road on the other side, that's when the car almost hit me. Just some young kid just zipping along with his girlfriend, and I could feel the tires go right by my foot and the side of the car along my body. And I was out in the intersection at that time. So I figured at that time that an angel took the hit. I now know that that's what happened. And so I made this statement that I would do whatever they wanted me to do when the time was ready. I figured they saved me for a reason. I was correct. And so about 2003, the Journey people came back, and a voice, I was nearing 50 at the time, almost 50, and I found that almost everybody that was important in American and world history, all the great geniuses, most of them wrote their, like, Paradise Lost and most of their most famous work, Dante's Inferno and stuff, after they turned 50. And Galileo was almost about that age when he made most of his, almost everybody was about that age. And so at about that time, a voice came to me, and I'm not used to hearing voices in my head, and I didn't hear this in my head. I was actually working on a drawing of the Carmel mission that I was working on. And the voice said, you need to find out who your family was and what they did. And I'm like, okay, I know who they are. They were in San Juan Bautista, which is now a state park, and yada yada. I put my autograph in the thing, and I'm kind of being flip about it. Well, the voice just said in a very stern way, you have no idea, that's what he said, who your family is and what they did. From that day on, I started doing research, and I found out I knew I was a ninth generation Californian. I found out that my grandfather, a great-grandfather, was born 100 years from when I was born, and he was a stagecoach driver. And I found out all the stuff about San Juan Bautista. I found out that his father was an empire builder, and that, in San Juan Bautista, he built a grand hall. He was setting up the government. He lived in a house that was next to Castro's house. I found out that their neighbor was Breen from the Donner Party. I started finding out all this stuff. Then I started dressing up in costume because I was going to write a fiction about it. I did write a fiction about it, about Robert Louis Stevenson meeting my great-grandfather. Mark Twain actually did meet my great-grandfather in San Juan Bautista. I found that out also. So, and because the state had a state park. So then I started dressing up, and that created me going around in costume, a stagecoach costume, and taking pictures. Well, I would find out later on, in 1978, I came here to New Hampshire and to Maine because I was checking on my relatives and checking back, collecting bottles and stuff. At the time, I was looking for an old 1700s house, and I couldn't find one. There was some place in Rye that my cousin was going to take me. Didn't ever. But I did find some bottles here in Maine, and so I drove a little Datsun that he had for me back across the United States. It's the first time I'd ever been across the United States. When I got back in 1978, I used to tear down houses. When I was 16, I tore down my first large building. I also built forts and stuff. When I came back, this woman had died who was a famous Monterreyan, and so I took down her house, and I salvaged it, and that was the big house that I took down. Well, that had all kinds of things in it. In it were, I found in her back closet, I took up some mats, and in it were newspapers, 1927, of actual newspapers of Lindbergh crossing the Atlantic, the big adventure. And so I carefully took them up and I stuck them in a box, and they went into my parents' attic storage where the rest of my college stuff was too. And so by the time I turned 50, I started working on the journey. And I found out that that Lindbergh had come to Monterey and actually flew a glider off of where I worked on this ranch called the Fish Ranch. And we drove around in a Willys Jeep truck. And so basically what I did is I went through the newspapers, and I found that those newspapers would tell the future of me. Now, this is hard to believe, but where I built my cabin, there was a guy in the newspaper taking a drink out of the side of the mountain, which was called Sardine Lake Springs, River Creek, and I had been going there since I was a kid and taking a drink out of that fountain. Turned out that I bought my cabin site right below that fountain, and there's a guy standing there. So I took another picture in my thing. And so now I decided that I would take Mark Twain, who was a stagecoach person and my great-grandfather, and I found a Willys Jeep in 1953, like the ones that I had ridden in a fish ranch, and I was going to buy it, and then I was going to put the stagecoach on top of it and drive across the United States. And it was something that I called the man in a dream. Well, it never happened that way. The guy got in an accident with the Jeep and sold it for scrap, which is too bad. But I wasn't supposed to get that Jeep anyway. I told you I work with the spirit world, and they have it all planned out. So I came across the United States, and on the whole way I looked to see if there were any of these Jeep trucks like the one I wanted for my man in a dream. There were none. So I get here to Maine, and I'm checking out my family, and I build a wall out of some of the stones that my great-grandfather used in his development, which is Underwood Springs, Falmouth. And he had a campground in the 1920s, and my grandfather went there. All this stuff lined up, and so by then I had lost the house, and we were coming across the United States, and so I went into a place called, well, I'll tell you that later maybe. I was now being directed to where I was supposed to go, and my idea was that I would go to Boston and go to Harvard and show them my mathematics and my systems and all the stuff that I had learned, because Longfellow taught at Harvard, and the Longfellow House was right there in Cambridge, and the Longfellow House is named the Craigie House. Andrew Craigie was an engineer, and so Longfellow got it from the Craigies. Well, it turns out that my name is Craig E. Zanetta, so there's the Craigie House. So my house was also the Craigie House. And as it was, my great-grandfather knew Longfellow, was following Longfellow. And I had written poetry in 2007. It's all lining up, and I don't want to make this too long, but when we got to Boston, we found we couldn't take an apartment, even though we had money. We didn't have an income. So we were told that you could find a cheap house to buy. We looked at houses in Natick and other places in New Hampshire. So we just crossed the border, and we stayed at a Red Roof in Salem, and we met this lady. She said, "Oh, my mother's a realtor." So this lady took us around to different places, which we didn't want. And so finally I went to the big book fair in New Hampshire and the skating rink at the annual one, and I found a real cool book. Anyway, we found out about this house, and so she met us up here, and this turned out to be Peterborough, New Hampshire. The house had sat on the market for 10 years. Nobody wanted it, but it was set up for us to buy it. It was an 1878 house. It was a Patriot's house. And so that was perfect. It had a big barn, but I found out, because I was going to sell my art and my books out of it, and I would have done well. And that was 8 years ago, 2014. And the rest of our stuff ended up being stolen in Monterey. We never did get it. It was supposed to come over on a trailer. So my whole book collection didn't make it here. So what happened after that is we started putting it together. I found out that the barn, even though it was a cool barn, and I would have sold my books and my art out of it, the floors were all messed up and it needed rebuilding. So I offered to take a barn down because I was good at that. I'd never taken down a timber framer. And I did that, and it took me about 6 months. In the meantime, I found a clue that was to a painting for Revelations of Albrecht Dürer, which was one of the artists that I was working with And so this took a long time, and we finally didn't get back to California to try to retrieve our stuff until 2016. What does this have to do with any of this? I was brought here for a reason. Basically, the spirit world wanted me to come here. There were two reasons. One, this was the house of the seventh son of the seventh son. It also would turn out I was into national treasure, and it would turn out that this was one of the houses that was owned by a signer of the Declaration of Independence. He was one of 75, and in 1840 he was still alive. Now, if you know your history, you'll know that there weren't 75 signers of the Declaration. There were 55, according to National Treasure, which I was into. And so basically, it turns out he signed the New Hampshire Declaration of Independence. And that was signed before the 4th of July Declaration. I would also luck out because I was into National Treasure. I thought this was cool, and the house was just excellent. They were also people who fought in the Revolution. That I found out that an actual signer had property in Dublin, just up above here, and had come in this house. And he was the 56th person. He wasn't there at the initial signing from New Hampshire. And so basically now I'm in a historic house, and I'm brought here on purpose. In the meantime, when we were coming here, our GPS took us to a Willys Jeep truck. I hadn't seen one the whole trip, and there were two. The Weeby, what we called her, took us up over the hill, and we saw a house, and we said, we can't afford that house. What are you doing, Weeby? And down, sitting by the barn with the horses, were two Willys snowplow trucks, 1953 and a 1961. And so I said, this is cool, I'll have to have it rebuilt. But, so I went back and I bought it, and my friend picked it up, and by then I was into about $1,300 for it. And we brought it down and we filmed it. And there's my truck. Now I can do the man in a dream thing. But I'm on the East Coast. I'm not on the West Coast. And I've already traveled across in my Chevrolet truck. That was my father's. And I did all the man in a dream things on the way. And so, but I still wanted to go back and do it. I have lots of pictures of me in costume and the man in the dream. So now, my point is, we're getting into the Willys Jeep truck again, the Willys. And so, after that, I went to have it fixed. I took the Chevy bed off of it, and I put a trailer on the back of it that was here on the property. And then, someday, they'll take the Ford engine out of it, and take the Toyota axle out of it, and rebuild it. I'm hoping that Jeep will do that. So along the way, I found another Jeep that was up in Francistown, and it was a 1961 Wagoneer, I don't know what they call them. But it was in excellent shape. I mean, it's in horrible shape, but it had all of its parts, so I was going to take the parts off of that. Well, my wife and I decided, because we couldn't afford this house and it was so big, that we'd make a bed and breakfast out of it. We'd stayed in a bed and breakfast in Greenfield. We thought that was a good idea. It was a historic house. And so we went with that idea. And so the barn was going to be converted to a place where people could sleep. Well, that didn't work. And I never did. I got the siding off the barn to side my barn and rebuild it. That didn't work either. The barn just sat ragged. Still is today. Well, the spirit world knew exactly what they were doing. And I know this sounds strange, but they didn't want me to redo the barn, because later on I got a Model T. An actual Model T that went to Egypt. Then I created a whole character to go with the barn in 2 movies which haven't been shot, and now I'm losing everything. And so the set is all there, the costumes are all there, I just need a backer. This is the coolest movies ever. They're about historical people. They're about people that actually were there when Carter did the tomb of Tut. They were there in all of the tombs, and there were 2 of them here. And they knew Sir Flinders Petrie, they knew Bush, I don't think that's his name. Anyway, but they were also artists, and they created their own places here, and so I'm getting off track. In the meantime, I decided to convert the Jeep into a Beach Boy type wagon, take the back off that was badly damaged. A tree fell on it over there on the farm. And then use it for a taxi to take people to Cunningham Pond and pick them up from the little airport that's here. It could have been a Lindbergh mock-up. And I forgot to tell you that I flew an airplane like Lindbergh's out in Monterey. So there's the Jeep. And I was going to remodel the Model T and paint it for a dream that I had about making blueberry special things from the East Coast, New England blueberry products. And that fell through. Fortunately, I didn't paint the Model T because they wanted me to do this movie, and the Model T is supposed to be in the barn when the guy comes and takes it over because he inherits it. And everything has to be old. And let's make it an amazing October Halloween movie for the beginning. But I don't know if that's going to happen now. So in the meantime, I took videos. The other Jeep was out in the forest on a farm in Francistown. And I bought it from the guy for $400. And I said, I got to take a movie of this. So this is like one of those cool documentaries that everybody wants to see. We drove his tractor up there. We cut the tree off with a chainsaw and pulled it over. And he had all this old farm equipment out there. And I think this was a 61 Wagoneer. And the tree had squashed the roof. And so we got the thing into gear. And we rolled this thing down with the tractor. And there was a couple places where we thought we would make it. And then we rolled it out to the front, and then I had a tow truck pull it up. But it's such a cool thing to see this Jeep sitting out there. And this was a 1961 Jeep. I think it actually came from Area 51. It came from Nevada. And so now it's in my yard. We're back to Jeep again. So I've been working on the project here, and one of my thoughts is I need to sell it. I need to get sponsors on it. It's got so much pedigree. It's amazing. For one thing, I worked out my mathematic programs here. I worked out all my Leonardo things. Right now, we're in a room that I built out of books. It's the smartest room in the world. I had all my advanced mathematic drawings in here. And the guy that's filming this knows now it's just sheetrock all over and wallpaper. But in the very corner over there is one of the most advanced mathematics on star chart things ever drawn. And so, it's in that corner over there. So basically, I put that up after I took everything down. I had started drawing on the wallpaper before I built this room. This room is built, the reason I call it the smartest room in the world, is it's created out of boxes of alcohol books from the liquor store. And he's not going to take it off me, but maybe later he can. It's okay. So it's a good thing that I built this room, and I wanted it to go around the U.S., and I did the 2 walls in it, and then I saved enough boxes to do the other 2 walls. And when my friend came in here, he was amazed at my drawings. He loves my drawings anyway. He's one of my good supporters for my math. And so I got to speed this up a little bit. But what happened is I started getting sick, and I went to the hospital, and I picked up some sort of disease that's eating my face, and a good doctor would know what that was. It has something to do with thrush. It has something to do with the fact that I was working on the barn, and the barn had a chicken coop. I met a guy in the hospital, actually, that told me that this guy was a cool guy, and he'd been helping me, told me that he had scratched himself on a chicken coop, and that the symptoms that I was describing, he had this foul taste in my mouth and destroying my face. And I worked for almost a year trying to get this hospital to help me. And now they're not admitting me anymore because I guess I threatened to sue them, and they didn't do anything. So now I'm dying even quicker, and I lost my face and everything, which to my way of thinking is very bad. I have spent 67 years and basically a hard 20 years creating what the spirit world wanted me to do. and doing amazing 5,000 years worth of history. I've written 165 books, none of them published. They're all full-length novel size. I've written 5 million years in the last, since 2009. And I have 50 journals that cover all of the mathematics and all of the early work from California. And probably it's all going to be lost. I'm trying to get somebody to publish my work, but I'm running into trouble. Now I might have found somebody that's called something called the Theosophical Society of America, and they do quest books, and hopefully maybe they'll publish my work for low cost or just for, returns on the consignment thing. All of my books could be put into National Geographic magazines and come out monthly, or Life magazine, or not just National Geographic, Smithsonian magazine, or History magazine. And they would have enough there to print a magazine a month for 10 years. And the idea there is they would just give me, I'm losing that word, but it's what authors get from royalties. And they would just give me royalties. Now, if they paid me $1 a magazine, I would sell 200,000 copies easily, and probably close to 1 million worldwide. And so I'd get $1 million for every book, which was converted to a magazine. Now, we're talking things that are mystic stuff, Freemason stuff, advanced mathematics, things Leonardo da Vinci, things every famous person you can imagine I've covered in 165 books. And then that's not even counting my fictions and the movie books and stuff. Or the Follow the Star, which was about a black man being picked up by Thoreau and coming here. And then that came to me in a dream in the upstairs room in the 1778 house. And then it came true. I found out that actually in 1853, Thoreau did come through here and most likely stayed at this house. And also Thoreau, I found out, picked up a slave and took him somewhere up to Vermont. So everything the dream told me was true. And then I wrote another book called The Last Christmas Cabin. And there's a cabin, and my friend has video of it, that I built off the back. And because I wanted freedom from the oppression that I was feeling in Monterey, I was building cabins. I built 2 little cabins up in the Sierras. I never got the big cabin finished, but I took it all up there. And I had a small lot wedged in there. I could look out on the Sierra Buttes. And it was just down below the water thing that I was telling you. It's on the river. I mean, it wasn't on the river, but it was up from the river. And again, my parents picked that lot out. They picked out my other house in Monterey. And so, again, I did the Man in the Dream shoot there. And I just did all these things for the Man in the Dream. So what happened? I got sick. And then I was out cutting the grass, and I wasn't doing too well. My ankles and stuff had frozen from being in this room. It's very cold in here. And so I went to the hospital. My foot all swelled up. And there I was supposed to be at that hospital getting fixed for my infection. And they did the foot, and then all of a sudden they put the foot, because I pulled my Achilles heel or something, and there was a fracture in it or something. It wasn't all the way through. And so then they put me in this cast, and all of a sudden I'm thrown back in this house. I can't live in this house. I can't survive in this house. And I'm supposed to be in bed on my back or whatever. I can't sleep on my back anyway, because I drowned in my saliva that's from the stuff. And so I'm stuck. And I'm like, what is this going to happen? So then I'm really stuck. I'm stuck in the room. I can't move. I can't use the crutches. They wrecked my hernias. And it just wrecked everything that I was. It made everything totally worse. I had to go back and have them rebind it because it was tearing apart my knee. And that was from the very first night. I couldn't put my clothes on because I couldn't bend my knee without scratching up myself and tearing up my skin on my upper leg. I'm like, this is horrible. Here's a man that used to run track. Here's a man that has climbed up Monadnock and walked up stones that are 3 feet high and jumped down from a roof of a garage in Marina when I was a kid. Here's a guy that could jump over fences and climb fences. I wasn't a hurdler. I was an 880 person. I always came in last. But I've walked over beaches and mountains and streams and lakes, and I could row boats and swim. I swam underwater most of the time. And now I can't do anything. And if I do, I run the risk of losing my leg totally and being totally paralyzed. I couldn't get around on the crutches, and the people that were supposed to be bringing me stuff were not too happy about it, so they didn't. And so all of a sudden I'm stuck. I can't go get anything to eat. I finally had my wife go up in the barn, and there was a wheelchair left there from the previous people that owned it. I don't know if the man or the woman used it. But fortunately, this house has very narrow doors, especially into the 1778 part. Well, they had a custom-made wheelchair. Now this thing is really funky. I'm actually sitting in it right now. And so I left it in the barn, not knowing that I would need it. And so my wife brought it down, carried it down the stairs from the second story of the barn where I had put it. And it's missing most of its parts. And so I'm using an old chair back for the back that I found. And so all of a sudden I'm like, well, this is bad. But I got into the wheelchair and I found I could wheel it around. Now, I'm not supposed to do that. I'm messing up my foot anyway. And so, but I couldn't sleep in the bed and I had nobody to help me. And it's no offense to my wife, but she's not just, this was overwhelming and the house is overwhelming. And now everything came to an end. And I was going to have Jeep buy this property, which is 2.5 acres, and it's got trees around it, and it's got a thing that looks like a cabin that I built. And I didn't finish it, and it's got a tiny house, it's got a big barn to do the movies, 3 stories, and it's got a 1778 house that was, visited by real patriots that lived here. They were the ones that built the house, and it was built during the Revolution. Everything that has to do with this house has to do with the creation of America, which I found out on my Man in a Dream journey and all my research. It was a safe house. A black person died here. She was a slave, but she was also a runner. She was going back and getting other slaves to be here. Cheney was here. Frederick Douglass was in this house. Mark Twain was in this house. All these people. And like I said, Thoreau was in this house. And so everything that they showed me in my dream is now in a 100,000 word book that hasn't been published. It's called Follow the Star. And the artwork is mine. It was shown to me in the dream. So basically, along with that, I went back, and for some reason, the journey kept showing me all this stuff that had to do with abolition. I bought out a bookstore, and one of the top books was a book by William Lloyd Garrison. And then I found out he's the main character. And then I wanted all this stuff. And then I end up, there was a book sale here. I buy an actual liberation paper. I'd never seen one, and now there's one in my collection. I bought a Harriet Beecher Stowe cabin book, and it's not a first edition. Then I bought the whole autobiography on Frederick Douglass. He wrote it, and I bought it at Eagle Bookstore. It's not there anymore. She's gone. And the guy bought the bookstore and just trashed it. And so, all of a sudden, I have probably the most advanced library on abolition that goes with this house and goes with the play. The Follow the Star is actually a play about Thoreau and myself, both of us dying and going back and talking about our lives. And one of the things he talks about is bringing Jack Black up here. And then running him through to Vermont, which he knew the territory because he was a surveyor. And his mother, of course, was born in Keene, which is just up there. So, and I'm getting off the subject, but they spent all this energy so that I would put this all together. Now I have it all together in the last Christmas cabin, and so I'm stuck in the wheelchair. But I wanted Jeep to wrap around this project and maybe ultimately just use it for their executives and the Chrysler, people to come up and camp and drive their Jeeps and then promote the Jeeps. So something else happened, and this is where we get to the bottom line. When I was out there, are you okay?
Yep.
And so when I was out there, I rolled up to the door of the cabin because I cleared the space, the walkways which hadn't been cleared. I built this room, and all of a sudden on the other side I had clear pathways to roll the wheelchair. Now this was planned, plus I'm in the room dying, but it's a room, and laying in the bed dying. But now I have a room that has clearance all the way around it. Same with the up above room. This is the below room, the smart room, and I did all my math here. And now I had access all the way around it with the wheelchair. So once I cut some of the sills out, I was able to go to the back door of the cabin and open it and see the grass that I had just cut, which caused my accident, I think. And I watched the rain come down and turning my grass green. And I sat there. And I'm sorry, but something happened to me. I realized that I could sit there in my wheelchair and see the land that I and nature created, the most beautiful place. And I'm from Monterey, and I've seen a lot of landscape. I wanted to die in the forest, so I created space around my house, and I refused to go in the hospital for any length of time and die, because I'd been there already, almost dying. It's horrible. And I've been in places where there are people in beds and stuff, and I realized that when I was in the wheelchair there, that I could just roll up there and see this sight. And I sat there for a few minutes, or 20 minutes, or 10 minutes, watching the rain come down and drip off the porch, and it was watering all the grass that I had cut, and it was all turning green, and I watched the maple trees and the alder trees and the ash trees all starting to turn leaf colors, yellow and stuff, and falling on my grass, which I'd have to clean up, which I can't clean up now. And then there's the Willys sitting out there, the Wagoneer, and I saw that, and then up above I could almost see the Willys, the 53 truck, and I knew the man in dream had happened. And I made my own country road, which I could roll on now if I could get out there, and with a wheelchair. And I'm like, I did all this. They knew that the gift was not only this cool old house, which was Patriot's house. The gift was for me to see something beautiful that I remembered as a kid. And I know this sounds strange, excuse me, but I thought, what if a man in a wheelchair could drive up here, come to the cabin, and sit in the same place that I was, and for the first time see what it is to be camping, to be in the forest. Now, people are going to say, well, they have vans and stuff like that, but that's not the idea. I realized that if Jeep took this over, then I designed a handicapped Jeep. I designed a Jeep that you roll your wheelchair into and you unload in your wheelchair. And this Jeep doesn't just allow you to come to my handicap farm. It allows you, which is what I call it, sort of, whatever. It's the farm of freedom because it allows freedom. I forgot to mention that I was also building a monument to freedom here to represent all freedom, including my freedom of being here. And so I call this the farm of all men are free, and the slogan was all men are free. And this way, being handicapped doesn't mean you're restricted. So, and then he can go in his Jeep, he can go down to Cunningham Pond, he can go down to Shaw's and do his normal shopping. Because his wheelchair just rolls right out of the Jeep, and there's a lift on the back, so he's all self-contained. Now, you could say, well, you know, people can lift their wheelchairs, and some people have lifts on their cars, some people can roll into the side of their van. This is different. This is a Jeep truck, and it's designed the way it's designed, and I'm not going to show you a picture of it because I haven't patented it, and hopefully nobody will just take my idea. But it's designed so he can drive it off-road, he can take it up into the mountains, and he pulls into the campsite, and someday I envision that there are campgrounds that will just accommodate handicapped people. Now, you can say, well, there are bathrooms and stuff, and there are handicap ramps. This is different. This is actually driving up to a campsite where you do like every other camper does, and you can put up your tent, but this thing also converts to a tent, like a little loafer top thing that raises up and down. It has the whole setup for a tent to go over it. And then he can go down to the picnic table, but he can actually eat in the truck if he wants. He rolls past it, and then part of it folds down. It's his bed. Everything he does is in that thing. It's going to be equipped with all the emergency equipment, flashlights. It even has its own shower, and so it also has a porta potty or a porta toilet. And it's an amazing thing that I created. The idea was that someday when they build this vehicle, it'll probably cost at least $100,000. It's basically built on a Jeep base, the extended Jeep base, and it's got to be at least 1 ton rated or more because it's got a lot of heavy equipment. Most of the equipment, and even including the wheelchair, are made out of aluminum, high tensile aluminum, so that it's not super heavy. It's got places for the luggage racks. It's got ice wipers, and it's got shady spots over the windshield, so it looks like a tank. I'm sorry, but it's a Jeep. And so now I want to talk the Jeep people into coming, the Chrysler Corporation, and funding this. And they would be allowed to buy the whole property. There's a property adjacent which they could buy and make a whole trail almost to the swamplands. And that's about 200 acres. I don't know if she'll still sell. But even if they bought the 15 acres next to me, no, it's 50 acres, I'm sorry. But that land connects to a trail already there. And some of that can be made a road for the Jeep to travel on. We're right next to Monadnock, and if somebody wants to attempt that in a wheelchair, that would be difficult, but it could be done. Maybe somebody has. I'm dying here, and I can't help it. I didn't get the help I needed, and every time I go to sleep and I lay on the bed. So I need help, and I've already tried to send a message to Jeep, but I haven't sent a letter explaining, and maybe this will do that. I also might be able to get my books published. There is The Man in a Dream. There's the existence of about 4,000 to 10,000 book library here, one of the most advanced for my project. And so that could be put in here. The actual building structures that are here are about 4,000 square feet. And if the movie's done and all that, I built a church here out of a church that came down. It's very cool. Unfortunately, it's on the 3rd floor of the barn. And so basically, in the long run, this would be the ultimate wheelchair camp. And I just hope if one man uses my Jeep to go out in the woods, my design, and enjoy camping for the first time on his own, then something would come of my thing. It's not the only thing. I've been working on water conservation and water preservation, and Peterborough right now is one of the worst towns in America. They're stealing our water and selling it through the stores and polluting it's polluted water. My following Leonardo da Vinci and all these people, everything in my work had to do with water and saving it, as well as trees. And so that also came to be. And I now know why. If Leonardo's dreams were true, we're going to lose our water probably in about 20 years. A lot of it's just going to go up in the sky and stay there. And we're going to fry. And I know that's not optimistic. So the Jeep thing is optimistic. The Jeep thing is something that can be done for people. I also invented some other things that haven't been things like something that will save a lot of lives, like 10,000 a year. But I'm not going to get into that. So I got to make this short. There are about 5 groups of people that could fund this project. One is the Ford Foundation with the Model T truck and the movies, and then Bill Gates because of the mathematics, the Bill Gates thing, and Jeep, of course, and General Mills for Cheerios. I've always eaten Cheerios, and they're part of my mathematic program, the Honey Nuts Hexagons. There's more, but you guys can just use your judgment. and do that. So thank you for listening, and I found out that this is 46 minutes. It was supposed to be brief, but I figured if you knew how much I put into this, $200,000, maybe three, or close to that, and 8 years of my life here, and 67 years of my life total, and 20 years on the journey. But the gift to mankind is enormous. I've also developed a math program that will go around the world. So I gotta go. Thank you very much.